A federal judge looked at Diddy's lawyers and said 6 words nobody expected. This is an exceptionally difficult case, and if his legal team wins this appeal, Diddy could walk out of Fort Dix within weeks. The ruling drops any day between now and August. But here is what nobody is telling you. This argument is so powerful, so legally unsettled, that it does not just affect Diddy. If it works, it changes how the entire federal sentencing system operates in America. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what that argument is and what happens if the court rules in his favor.
How are you feeling today?
Let's start at the beginning, because to understand what happened in that courtroom on April 9th, you need to understand exactly what Diddy was convicted of, and more importantly, what he was not convicted of, because that distinction is everything in this case. When Diddy went to trial last summer, the government came at him with 3 major charges: racketeering conspiracy, the most serious federal charges they had, and 2 counts of violating the Mann Act. Now the first 2 charges, the racketeering and the most serious charges, those were the big ones, the ones the prosecutors built their entire case around, the ones that carried the most serious consequences. And after a 7-week trial, the jury came back and acquitted Diddy of both of them. Not guilty on the most serious charges. The jury heard everything, saw everything, and said, not proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The only charges that stuck were the 2 Mann Act counts, which is a federal law that prohibits transporting someone across state lines for illegal purposes. 2 counts. That is what Diddy was actually convicted of. Now here is where it gets interesting. Because for a typical Mann Act conviction at the same offense level and the same criminal history as Diddy, the average sentence handed down by federal judges is around 15 months. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. That is the normal range for this specific charge at this specific level. So what did Judge Arun Subramanian give Sean Combs? 50 months. 50. That is more than 3 times the typical sentence for the exact same charge. And Diddy's legal team walked into that appeals courtroom on April 9th with one central argument: that 50-month sentence is not a punishment for what the jury said he did. It is a punishment for what the jury said he didn't do. Now, to understand why that argument is so powerful and why it made 3 federal appeals court judges genuinely uncomfortable, you need to understand a doctrine called acquitted conduct sentencing. And I promise you this is not as complicated as it sounds. Here is the simple version. In the American federal justice system, when a judge sentences someone, they are not limited to only considering what the jury found the person guilty of. They are allowed to consider other conduct, other behavior, other allegations, even allegations the jury rejected, even things the defendant was found not guilty of. As long as the judge believes that conduct is relevant to the case, they can use it to justify a longer sentence. And the standard of proof at sentencing is much lower than at trial. At trial, the government has to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. At sentencing, the judge only needs to believe something is more likely true than not. So technically, a jury can say not guilty, and a judge can turn around and say, I still think it probably happened, and I am going to punish you for it anyway. Now take a second and let that sink in, because that is exactly what Diddy's legal team is arguing happened here. They are saying that Judge Subramanian looked at those 2 charges the jury rejected, decided he personally believed Diddy probably did those things anyway, and used that belief to nearly quadruple the typical sentence for the charges Diddy was actually convicted of. And when defense attorney Alexandra Shapiro stood up in that appeals courtroom and laid this argument out in front of 3 federal judges, one of them stopped her and asked the prosecution a question that cut right to the heart of it. You went to the jury and said this man did all these terrible things, and they acquitted him. Why shouldn't we hold you to the way you prosecuted the case? Now, the prosecution did not just roll over. They came back with their own argument. And honestly, it is not a weak one, which is exactly why this case is so complicated. The government's position is this: Judge Subramanian did not sentence Diddy based on conduct the jury rejected. He sentenced him based on conduct Diddy himself admitted to over the course of the trial. And there is a difference, a significant one, legally. See, during the trial, a lot of what happened at those hotel sessions came out through Diddy's own admissions, his own testimony, his own acknowledgement that these things occurred. The government's argument is that admitting something happened is completely different from being convicted of it, and that a judge is absolutely allowed to consider admitted conduct at sentencing, even if that conduct overlaps with charges the jury rejected. Prosecutor Christy Slavic stood up in that courtroom and told the judges directly what really drove his analysis didn't rely on acquitted conduct. It didn't even rely on disputed issues to begin with. And then she went further. She told the court that even if the judges disagreed with every single one of the sentencing enhancements, it wouldn't matter, because Judge Subramanian had already said at sentencing that he would have arrived at the exact same 50-month sentence regardless, that even without the disputed enhancements, 50 months was the right number based on everything else in the case. And that argument matters, because it gives the appeals court a way to uphold the sentence even if they agree with Diddy's legal team on the acquitted conduct issue, which is exactly what makes this case so difficult to call. But then the judges pushed back on the prosecution too. And what one of them said exposed the real problem at the center of this entire case, because Judge Miller Baker looked at the prosecution and asked them something that nobody in that courtroom had a clean answer to. He pointed out that the Mann Act charges, the ones Diddy was actually convicted of, were essentially a sideshow during the trial. That the government spent the overwhelming majority of their time and energy trying to prove the more serious charges, the racketeering, the most serious charges the government brought. That is where the witnesses were focused. That is where the evidence was directed. That is where the government built their entire case, and the jury rejected all of it. So Baker asked the prosecution directly, "Why shouldn't we hold you to the way you prosecuted the case? In other words, you told the jury this man did all of these terrible things as part of a massive criminal operation." The jury said no, and now you want a federal judge to sentence him as if the jury said yes. How is that fair? And the prosecution's answer was essentially that there was too much overlapping evidence to draw a clean line between what proved the Mann Act charges and what proved the more serious charges the jury rejected. That everything was connected, that you cannot just slice off the acquitted conduct and pretend it never existed, which is where the pizza slice argument came in. Prosecutors essentially told the court that the evidence in this case was like a pizza. You cannot take one slice out of the box and pretend the rest of the pizza is not there. The hotel sessions, the travel arrangements, the coercion allegations, all of it was connected, all of it overlapped, all of it informed the judge's understanding of who Sean Combs was and what he actually did. But here is the problem with that argument, and this is the part that made the judges visibly uncomfortable. If you cannot separate the evidence, if it is all one connected pizza as the government says, then how do you justify giving someone a 50-month sentence for the 2 slices the jury convicted him on, when the jury threw the rest of the pizza out entirely?
8 months pregnant Cassie Ventura on the stand today, describing a complicated and abusive relationship with Sean Diddy Combs that began when she was 21. "He controlled a lot of my life," Ventura said, calling Combs a scary person. Ventura testifying that they had violent arguments where he would mash my head, knock me over, drag me, kick me.
And this is where we need to talk about the moment that nobody saw coming, the moment that made this appeal more dangerous for the government than almost anyone predicted. Because buried inside Diddy's legal arguments is a piece of evidence from the trial that his defense team kept coming back to in that courtroom. A single flight, Paris to New York. Spring 2012, Cassie Ventura testified that during the Cannes Film Festival that year, Diddy had accused her of stealing from him and turned on her. And on the flight back to New York, he moved seats specifically to sit next to her. And for the entire duration of that flight, he forced her to watch recordings of their hotel sessions and threatened to release them publicly if she did not comply. Then the moment they landed in New York, he demanded another session immediately. Now during sentencing, Judge Subramanian pointed directly at that flight as proof of coercion. He said, and this is a direct quote from the judge, "There is no doubt that this evidence counts as coercion, and that coercion finding is what triggered a sentencing enhancement that pushed Diddy's sentence significantly higher than it would have been without it." But here is the problem. The jury acquitted Diddy of the charges that required proving coercion, which means Shapiro stood up in that appeals courtroom and said something that landed like a bomb. The judge found coercion when the jury had already decided coercion was not proven. And if the appeals court agrees with that argument, the entire sentencing calculation collapses. Not just the enhancement, the whole foundation that justified 50 months over the typical 15. And here is where the story gets even more layered. Because Diddy's legal team did not just walk into that courtroom with one argument, they came with 2. And the second one is the one that made the judges raise their eyebrows the hardest. His lawyers argued that the hotel sessions at the center of this entire case were not illegal activity at all, and this is their actual legal position: highly choreographed performances, staged productions involving costumes, role play, and lighting setups. filmed specifically so they could be watched back afterward. And because of that, his legal team argued the entire activity was protected expression under the First Amendment. Amateur content creation, a form of personal filmmaking that falls under constitutionally protected speech. Now, before you react, understand that this is not as wild as it sounds from a purely legal standpoint. Courts have consistently held that certain adult content production is protected under the First Amendment. And Diddy's lawyers argued that the Mann Act, which was originally written in 1910, was never intended to cover this kind of situation. That the law should be limited to clear commercial transactions, not private personal arrangements between people in a relationship. The prosecution called this argument meritless. They told the court that accepting it would mean anyone could avoid accountability for transporting others for illegal purposes simply by filming what happened. And notably, the judges themselves pushed back hard on this argument during the hearing. It did not get much traction in the room, but here is why it matters anyway. His team filed it. It is on the record. And if the main acquitted conduct argument succeeds on appeal, this First Amendment argument becomes irrelevant. But if it fails, this is the backup. And the fact that Diddy's legal team is still pushing it tells you everything about how much they need this appeal to work. So let's talk about what the judges actually signaled in that room. Because when you have been following this case as closely as we have, you learn to read between the lines of what appeals court judges say out loud. And what these three judges said on April 9th was revealing in ways that the mainstream coverage completely missed. First, the hearing was supposed to last 20 minutes, 10 minutes for each side. It lasted 2 hours. 2 full hours of the judges pressing both sides with questions, hypotheticals, and challenges. That does not happen when a panel has already made up its mind. That happens when judges are genuinely wrestling with something they cannot easily resolve. Second, the questions were not one-sided. The judges pushed back hard on the prosecution over the acquitted conduct issue, but they also pushed back on the defense over the First Amendment argument, which tells you the panel is not leaning clearly in either direction. They are genuinely conflicted. Third, and this is the most important signal of all, Judge William Nardini closed the entire 2-hour hearing with 6 words. This is an exceptionally difficult case. Now, in normal life, that might sound like a polite way to wrap things up, but in federal appeals court language, that is a judge telling you that the legal questions in front of them are genuinely unsettled, that there is no clean answer, that whatever they decide is going to require serious deliberation. And here is what that means for Diddy sitting in Fort Dix right now. His release date is currently set for April 15, 2028, but a ruling is expected sometime between now and August 2026, which means the next few months could either confirm he stays until 2028 or completely change everything. And we are going to be here covering every single development the moment it drops. But first, let me tell you exactly what each possible outcome actually means for Sean Combs.
Attorneys for Sean Diddy Combs filed an expedited appeal for the disgraced hip-hop star. They are asking for his immediate release and a reversal on his conviction of prostitution-related charges. Attorneys say Combs' girlfriend willingly and enthusiastically participated in the sexual encounters. Combs is serving a 50-month prison sentence on 2 interstate prostitution convictions.
Because this is the part that every other channel is skipping over. They tell you the appeal is happening. They tell you the judge said it was difficult, and then they move on. But what we do here at Fame Insight is go deeper. So let's break down every possible outcome from this appeal and what each one actually means for Diddy in real terms. Outcome 1. The appeal is denied. The Second Circuit looks at everything, decides Judge Subramanian acted within legal boundaries, and upholds the 50-month sentence in full. In this scenario, Diddy stays at Fort Dix. His release date remains April 15, 2028. He has already served time since his arrest in September 2024, so we are talking roughly 2 more years behind bars from right now. His legal team could then petition the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court accepts fewer than 100 cases per year out of thousands of petitions. The chances of them taking this one? Slim. Outcome 2. The sentence is reduced and the case goes back for resentencing. This is actually the most likely outcome if Diddy wins. The Second Circuit does not just release him. They send the case back to Judge Subramanian with instructions to resentence without relying on the disputed conduct. And here is where it gets interesting. If the judge resentences Diddy based purely on the typical range for his actual conviction, we are talking something closer to 15 months. Diddy has already served well over that, which means resentencing under this outcome could result in immediate release. He could walk out of Fort Dix within weeks of a ruling in his favor. Outcome 3. The conviction itself is overturned. This is the longest shot. the First Amendment argument gaining enough traction to vacate the Mann Act charges entirely. Legal experts consider this unlikely but not impossible. If it happens, Diddy walks free immediately with no conviction on record for these charges. Now here is the thing about all three outcomes that Fame Insight wants you to sit with. A ruling is expected any day between now and August. Any day. Which means Sean Combs could either be confirmed as staying in prison until 2028 or be a free man before the summer is over. And this is the part that I need us to talk about together. Because every time there is a legal development in this case, every time a ruling drops or a hearing happens, the conversation online immediately splits into two camps. The people who say Diddy deserves every single day he gets, and more. And the people who say the legal system has to follow its own rules, and if those rules say the sentence was wrong, then the sentence has to be fixed regardless of who the defendant is. And honestly, both of those positions make sense. Because here is the tension at the heart of this entire appeal. Nobody who has been following this case since the beginning, nobody who watched Cassie testify, nobody who saw that hotel surveillance footage, walked away thinking Diddy was an innocent man. The jury didn't think that either. They convicted him. They just didn't convict him of everything. And the question the appeals court is now being asked to answer is not, is Sean Combs a good person? It is not, did he do terrible things? The question is purely legal. Did the judge follow the rules when he calculated the sentence? And that question matters beyond Diddy, because the acquitted conduct sentencing doctrine affects thousands of federal cases every single year. People you have never heard of. People without Diddy's resources or his legal team. People who got sentences far beyond what their actual convictions warranted, because a judge decided to factor in things a jury said were not proven. The U.S. Sentencing Commission has already issued new guidance pushing back against this practice, which means this appeal is not just about whether Sean Combs gets out of Fort Dix early. It is about whether the federal sentencing system has to start playing by fairer rules. And sitting here watching this unfold, I find myself thinking about something. The people who were actually harmed in this case, the real human beings whose lives were affected, none of them get a do-over regardless of what this court decides. Whether Diddy walks or stays, their stories don't change. Their experiences don't get erased. And that is the part of this conversation that gets lost every time we focus purely on the legal chess match. Now let's bring this back to what is actually happening right now in real time. Because here is something that Fame Insight has been watching very closely that nobody else seems to be paying attention to. Alexandra Shapiro, the lead appellate attorney arguing for Diddy's release, stood up at the end of that hearing and did something unusual. She urged the judges to rule as quickly as possible. She specifically asked the panel not to let this drag out. And that tells you something important about the strategy his legal team is running right now. Because appeals courts are not obligated to move fast. A ruling could come in May, it could come in August. There is no deadline. So why is Shapiro pushing for speed? Two reasons. First, every additional month Diddy spends at Fort Dix while this appeal is pending is a month he cannot get back if he ultimately wins. Second, and this is the one we have been sitting with since that hearing dropped, the legal landscape around acquitted conduct sentencing is actively shifting right now. The U.S. Sentencing Commission has already moved against this practice. The window for this argument is open right now, and Shapiro wants a ruling before anything changes. The prosecution wants the opposite. They asked the court to take its time, to be thorough, to affirm the sentence carefully and completely, which is exactly what you want if you are confident the law is on your side. And the fact that both sides are playing the clock so differently tells you everything about who feels more exposed by this appeal right now. But here is where we land. And if you have been with us on this channel, you already knew this was coming, because we have been saying since the sentencing that 50 months for 2 Mann Act counts never added up. The numbers never made sense unless the judge was punishing Diddy for more than what the jury said he did. And now 3 federal appeals court judges are sitting in a room saying the exact same thing we have been saying. This is an exceptionally difficult case. A ruling is coming. It could drop any day between now and August. And when it does, Fame Insight is going to be the first place breaking it down completely, because that is what we do here. We watch, we dig, we make sure nothing gets buried. Now I want to hear from this community, because we have been calling this case right from the beginning. Do you think the appeals court is going to reduce Diddy's sentence? Or do you think they uphold the 50 months and he stays in Fort Dix until 2028? Drop your answer below right now. This one is going to divide the comments, and I want to see where Fame Insight stands. And if you want to understand the last major legal move before this appeal, the $100 million NBC lawsuit that collapsed spectacularly, we broke that down in full in our previous video right here on the channel. If you have been with us, you already know how that one ended. If you are just finding us now, that is exactly where you need to go next. I will see you there.